Today we will discuss pulse polio. Pulse polio. Now, it's often described in textbooks under the name National Immunization Day. Now, a very important topic. It is often not discussed. There's not much literature for this. That's why I'm embarking on this presentation. Recently, before the Pulse National Program on February 27, 2022, a very senior pediatrician who's considered teacher of teachers in my town at least, asked the local president of the IAP, Madam, educate me the relevance of the Pulse Polio program in the present era. Is it only in India? Can we have a Zoom meeting within 3 days? We didn't have a Zoom meeting. I don't know what the local president wrote to the professor, but it indicates the confusion that exists even in the mind of very learned pediatricians, let alone let alone the ordinary pediatricians, the general practitioners, and the public at large. Therefore, I'm trying to throw some light on the Pulse Polio program. First, we will look into a definition and science behind the Pulse Polio and National Immunization Day. The Pulse Polio actually is a term very often used in India, and the National Immunization Day is the term which you find in textbooks and world literature. What are National Immunization Days or Pulse Polio? During National Immunization Days, the doses of OPV are given to all children in a defined age group, usually children 0 to 59 months of age, in a short period of time as possible, regardless of the immunization status. All three are important points: defined age group, short period of time, regardless of the immunization status. NIDs are conducted as 2 rounds of mass immunization, the second occurring approximately 4 to 6 weeks after the first. Nowadays in South India, we are conducting only 1 round that's the knowledge I get from the WHO personnel. While in North India, we still conduct 2 rounds 4 to 6 weeks apart every year. The doses of OPV administered during NIDs are considered extra doses which supplement and do not replace the doses received during immunization. Therefore, every child, even if he has received his routine dose the previous day, he continues to get the national immunization dose the next day, or within probably 1 or 2 days they are exempted, but normally even the next day they are given the extra dose. The term pulse had been used to describe the sudden, simultaneous mass administration of OPV on a single day to all children. Most of these facts will be known to more pediatricians, but some of them may not be, but just for recollection, I am putting this up on the slide. The primary objective of NIDs are, of course, to eradication of polio virus. By giving oral polio at the same time to all children over a short period of time in a large geographic area, the transmission of polio virus is interrupted. All these are important. The wild polio is replaced by the virus which is contained in the vaccine, OPV. To be effective, NIDs may achieve high coverage with OPV. This is a very important point. Some people state that more than 95% coverage in the target population can be done. Therefore, the question arises is not something which is less easier than routine immunization. There's a natural question to this. If you are going to achieve 95% coverage every year twice, why don't you do the routine immunization in a better way? Therefore, special efforts are necessary to reach children often missed by routine immunization program. Why in the hell you want to go after this? Why don't you do that when you do the routine immunization? Why can't you reach these children only during pulse immunization? These are fundamental questions which are often raised. Now, what is the optimal season for which the national immunization program is done? In tropical climate, the highest transmission of polio occurs during rainy seasons, and in temperate climate during summer and early autumn. The highest transmission of not only polio virus, all enteroviruses. To have the greatest likelihood of interrupting transmission, NID should be conducted to season of lowest poliovirus circulation, also enterovirus circulation, usually during the cool, dry season, when circulation of all enteroviruses is lowest. Seroconversion is OPV is less during rainy seasons, possibly because of the interference by other enterovirus infections or diarrhea. Therefore, when you give OPV, we don't want to be interfered, its multiplication to be interfered by other enterovirus. That's the reason we give it not in rainy season, but in tropical countries in dry climate. Oral polio administration administered in campaigns also seems to be more immunogenic compared to OPV administered in routine immunization program. This is something given in the IAP guidebook, a little doubtful, but it could be because we are giving it at a time at which the circulation is better, because routine immunization we do both during rainy season and non-rainy season. Now we have already seen that the target group is between 0 to 59 months of age. Why? The basis of this recommendation is epidemiological, and the large majority are susceptible in countries in which polio is endemic are below 5 years of age. Now, at the time of planning of NID in India and China, that is in 1990s, more than 90% of the reported poliomyelitis cases were children below 5 years of age. The first NID in India in 1995 targeted children below 3 years of age. Countries choosing a lower target group, such as these, risk leaving enough polio susceptible children in older age groups to sustain some chain of polio transmission. For now, this is clear why we target below 5 years. Now, duration of NID. The WHO recommends that NIDs are conducted over a short period, 1 to 2 days. We have already seen this. What's the rationale? The basis of this recommendation is both immunological and operational. The introduction of large quantity of vaccine virus in a very short period of time appears to enhance seroconversion rates, probably by passive transfer of virus to susceptible children. Even those not vaccinated may get immunized because of the passive transfer of the virus by the fecal oral route. The cold chain can be better maintained for short campaigns. Therefore, these are the reasons why we have a during short period. The number of rounds of during national immunization days, the WHO recommends that NIDs are consistent of 2 rounds each year. By conducting 2 rounds 4 to 6 weeks apart, poliovirus circulation is suppressed or interrupted for a longer period than only 1 round were conducted. WHO generally recommends that instead of conducting a 3rd round, special efforts be made during the first 2 rounds to reach previously unimmunized children, particularly in high-risk areas. If this fails to interrupt transmission, then intensive door-to-door immunization. This is called a mopping up immunization. What do you mean by this is you don't give it in a large area, you give it in a defined focal area where there is spread. You can try to achieve 100% coverage by going door to door. We have already seen that 4 weeks is the time between the vaccine doses, the minimum interval required for seroconversion and boost gut immunity. Now, this is the same as in routine immunization. We don't want the antibodies generated in the first dose to interfere with the second dose. In the interval between the first and second dose should be short enough, 4 to 6 weeks, to minimize the possibility that wild poliovirus will begin to recirculate between rounds. There are some additional reasons in pulse polio. We don't want to be longer than 6 weeks because the wild poliovirus will begin to recirculate between the rounds. Now, something the listeners should know is sub-national immunization days. The India also conducts these days. That is, the pulse polio is not conducted all over India, but it conducted in certain parts of India like Bihar and Uttar Pradesh used to do that when transmission is high in these regions. And initially they used to conduct it to gain experience before subsequently going all over the country also. It's worthwhile digging a little into the history of the pulse immunization. In early 1980s, the Pan American Health Organization introduced systemic observance of national immunization days. It was in 1980s early. Rapid interruption of poliomyelitis transmission occurred in Cuba, Brazil, and the rest of the Americas by 1991. This was a success which spurred the rest of the world to embark on pulse polio program. Gradually, this tragedy was accepted worldwide for eradication and taken up by Western Pacific region, Africa and Asia. This strategy of pulse immunization was conceived in India in December 1993. In Delhi, actually, it was first rolled out in Delhi on the 2nd of October 1994, when the first child was immunized against polio, a part of this program. But actually, there were some things almost on similar times from Vellore also. Apart from the national program, so subsequently this was rolled out as national program all over India. Several subnational immunization days were held annually in the highest risk states. That means subnational immunization days means not all over the nation, but in certain states where the transmission risk was high, like UP, Bihar and West Bengal. Additional subnational immunization days over and above the national immunization days were also held. The national immunization days were not without controversies, and there was some blowback from the doctor communities as well as from the World Organization. WHO and UNICEF had initially a tiff. Sabin, through Rotary, thought he might finally have an opportunity of using disciplined volunteer force to deliver his drops to every child in the world on fixed national immunization days. In the Rotary Plus program, Rotary began funding countries that were willing to conduct national immunization days against polio using the Sabin-style campaign described as PANDI, Polio National Days of Immunization. WHO Director General Halden Mahler, who was had a domineering presence at that time, was focusing on strengthening the health services in countries. He was more concentrated on primary health service, and the last thing he wanted was dedicated program to eliminate polio. The WHO at that time concentrated on primary health care and not vertical programs, and therefore they were not very happy with this pulse polio program. But WHO is particularly worried about door-to-door delivery would weaken the health system overall, diverting resources from other sources. Mahler stated bluntly that any strategy that does not contribute to the strengthening of the health infrastructure should be discouraged. Henderson, director of the EPI, cautioned national immunization days are not a goal in themselves, but merely a strategy to increase immunization coverage. James Grant, the director of UNICEF, unlike Mahler, thought that the advantages of Rotary involvement in broader immunization program. But I must state here that finally, the WHO, even the director on his retiring speech, made an about turn and started supporting the national immunization days. Therefore, UNICEF and WHO came together in supporting the pulse polio later on. Now, there was local opposition from certain quarters also. In the Kerala government, medical officers had protested. They had in 2000, just about 1999 or 2000 actually, they said routine immunization strategy almost covers the under 5 clinics in the state. This is evident from reports of Director of Health Service. Kerala had a very good immunization rate, at least in 2000. No polio case has been reported anywhere over the last 3 years. A child under 5 years receives more than 15 doses of OPV by routine pulse and polio immunization, and the safety of giving large doses is not established. The changes in antibody profile and the additional protection offered by additional doses had not been established. This is in 2000. Issues raised by pediatricians and by doctors in the Kerala government service. They were very unhappy that the enthusiasm shown by authorities in intensified pulse polio immunization has not been shown in strengthening the routine immunization. They said routine immunization should be strengthened and not the pulse polio alone. Pulse polio immunization activities lasting for 4 days each, twice a year, disrupt the routine work of the primary healthcare institution and their staff. Mind you that this Kerala government, the government doctors on them falls the load of giving these, observing this pulse polio program, organizing, etc. Is not a small job. They said it affects the routine immunization. This adversely affects routine immunization, implementation, other health programs. Such weakening of routine immunization is more dangerous than skipping the pulse polio rounds. One of the very strong points they raised against Pulse Polio initiative is that any number of OPV doses administered to under 5 clinics would not prevent circulation of wild polio in the community. This was a questionable objection raised. The doctors were of the view that the National Health Program implemented in the state should have operational flexibility at the level of the state, and the state should abandon the current immunization schedule, and OPV should be even in 2000. They said that the OPV should be replaced by inactive polio viruses, which is more suitable for the communities with low incidence of polio. Mind you, this was raised in 2000 alone in Kerala, and now this has more or less been accepted world over. But these were not dismissed by the authorities. They said the AFP surveillance in Kerala is poor compared with counterparts in India, but that's questionable. The number of doses OPV provided to children under 15 is clearly within safety limits. Routine immunization activities are not affected by the initiative according to the government, and they pointed out that countries such as Cuba have successfully eradicated polio by this strategy while sustaining high rates of routine immunization. Whether states in Kerala can replace the efficiency of Cuba is questionable. There is no guarantee against virus import from neighboring states. This is a very important point. Even today, this is the point of worry in India. A state like Kerala, there's a lot of migration. When the neighboring countries like Afghanistan and Pakistan continue to have polio, there is worry that we might import the virus. But however, all the objections cannot be poo-pooed from that easily. Even the health secretary at the time, Sujata Rao, the civil servant who headed the Indian Ministry of Health in 2009 and 10, frequently expressed her frustration to the WHO at the way polio was sucking away resources from the more urgent needs. It was just not the peripheral doctors in a particular state were objecting. It was the most important person in the health department herself had a reservation. It completely disrupted the routine immunization campaign every 3 to 4 months of the year were devoted only to polio campaign. But no longer, this is not done to this extent nowadays. This meant these months there was no antenatal care, no routine immunization done. In theory, these immunization, they should have seen polio eliminated from the world in a few years, but it has not done. It has gone on for how many years now? Maybe 3 decades. OPV was less effective in India and other tropical countries than it was in more temperate climate. This is one of the real objections to pulse polio being given year after year for 3 decades. There were figures showing that children getting 10 doses, 12 doses of OPV were getting polio. Epidemiologists calculate that even after 15 doses, there was 10% chance of getting polio in places like UP and Bihar at that time. And further, campaign fatigue was setting in even as early as 2010. Regarding such an important program, which is inflicted on our small children year after year, we would expect a lot of discussions and published literature. What is striking is a lack of recent literature. The latest you could find some discussion about is in the IAP Guidebook on Immunization 2018-19, but that too it refers to articles previously. Like if you look at the references, it's 1997, 96, 2002, 1997. The rest of the literature doesn't discuss pulse polio and only talks about polio eradication and polio endgame. Therefore, both the IAP as well as the world literature, the author seems to fight shy of discussing the relevance of this program. If we had to get an idea about the relevance of the pulse polio, we had to first know the present situation of polio eradication. If you look at the situation in India, the last case of wild polio 1, that was the last case detected in 13/1/2011. After in West Bengal, afterwards we don't have a case. Polio 2 and polio 3 were eradicated earlier. That's good news. If you look at vaccine-derived poliomyelitis, or I think it's circulating vaccine-derived poliomyelitis after 2016, there's no literature. Possibly it is not there, as far as I could understand. Environmental surveillance, if you look at environmental surveillance for looking for virus in 2010, we had 20 cases, sewage samples of wild polio in India. And in 2018, we had 1 case of vaccine-derived poliomyelitis virus from the sewage. After that, nothing is being reported. That's good news as far as we are concerned. Now, therefore, India is polio-free for 9 years. This has been said in 2020, therefore it will be 12 years now. There have been no circulating vaccine-derived poliomyelitis outbreaks since past 4 years, probably 5 years now, and no detection of poliovirus in environmental samples over the last 3 years, which is 5 years. There's presently no evidence of polio transmission. Great, that is India. However, the scenario in the global wild polio virus in 2016 to 2022 is not that rosy. If you look at the wild polio type 1 confirmed cases, Pakistan had one last case in 27 January 2021, Afghanistan in 14 January 2022, and Malawi in 19 November 2021. Therefore, there's no question of polio eradication in the world 3 years after elapsed since the last case. Therefore, there's no question of polio eradication at least till 2025. This global map of showing the polio, wild polio and circulating vaccine-derived polio cases in the previous 12 months. The green dots are the circulating vaccine-derived poliomyelitis and the red are the wild polio viruses. Now, we have already discussed wild polio viruses and we will not be going further into that. Now, this data is generated on the WHO headquarters on 8th March 2022. And I thank Dr. Pradhaban, the WHO nodal officer, to give me this, for having given me this data and many other interesting data. Now, if you look at it, it's really alarming. You have polio, you have circulating all over Africa. And even in 2022, in February, we have a case of in Israel, which we never respect to. Therefore, the polio has not gone away from the world at all. Now let's look at the polio trends after OPV2 by the OPV2 virus immunization was stopped. That is the switch from trivalent polio to bivalent polio, which does not contain OPV2. Now the WHO reported an annual circulating vaccine-derived poliomyelitis cases from 2016. The switch occurred in 2016 to 20 in Africa and other countries. 1 case was reported from Nigeria and 1 from Pakistan in 2016. This is the figure which shows that the dark green is the African countries and the light green are the countries other than in Africa. If you look from 2016 to 2020, there's a dramatic rise in the cases of circulating type 2 vaccine-derived poliomyelitis. It's now more than 1,000 cases in 2020. And if you look at the countries in which at least 1 case, cumulative number of countries that reported at least 1 circulating vaccine-derived poliomyelitis type 2 case since 2016 in Africa and other countries, it also shows a very dramatic increase after 2016 when the switch happened. The total, this is the African countries, this is the non-African countries. Both are showing number of countries are also showing a dramatic increase. In 2020, more than half the cases, more than half of the 1,073 global reported circulating vaccine-derived polio cases occurred in 20 African countries, which far exceeded the 140 reported global case of type 1 wild polio viruses. Therefore, the circulating vaccine-derived poliomyelitis has substantially increased over type 1. The threat to the world is circulating vaccine-derived poliomyelitis now. Remember that circulating vaccine-derived poliomyelitis are as invasive, as paralytic, as a wild polio virus, and they can spread as fast as a wild polio virus. This is something which is not known even to some senior pediatricians who consider that the circulating vaccine-derived poliomyelitis does not cause paralysis frequently, does not cause paralysis, and if at all it causes, it doesn't cause serious one. No, it can be as serious as a wild polio virus. In 2016, 24 countries in Africa have reported circulating vaccine-derived poliomyelitis cases. That's what we showed in the second figure. Now, what's the reason for this calamity? The switch from the trivalent to bivalent OPV did not end type 2 poliovirus transmission. Before OPV2 cessation, some countries failed to stop transmission of existing type 2 circulating vaccine-derived poliomyelitis virus, or to achieve sufficient high population immunity to prevent the emergence after type 2 OPV2 cessation, which necessitated outbreak responses using monovalent OPV2 after mid-60s. After OPV 60s, other countries reintroduced MV2 in response to outbreaks of environmental evidence of type 2 transmission. To control circulating vaccine-derived poliomyelitis type 2, they reintroduced monovalent type 2 OPV. What this did is, this seeded the community again. This was a catch-22 situation. When you give monovalent OPV2, it again increases, it can change into circulating vaccine-derived poliomyelitis and increase the transmission while initially controlling the epidemic of it. Therefore, this was a catch-22 situation for which WHO does not have a solution yet. There are certain fundamental issues to be addressed before we can proceed any further in this matter. First is the relevance of the pulse immunization 40 years after it was introduced in South American countries, whether it is relevant even today. Now, according to the WHO, national immunization days are one of the 4 critical strategies recommended by the WHO for global poliomyelitis eradication and should be conducted in all countries where there is evidence that polio virus is widespread and where acute flaccid paralysis surveillance is unreliable. This was what they stated in 1997. Now, in a country like India, there is no evidence that the polio virus spread is widespread. But it seems that they are continuing it because they still consider acute flaccid paralysis surveillance unreliable. This is the conclusion we can come to when they insist on continuing the oral polio vaccine, oral pulse polio vaccine. When neighboring countries like Afghanistan and Pakistan continue to have cases, it's too risky to drop our guard. A place like Kerala, which has a lot of migration, and even today the whole world is a very small village, it is definitely risky if you are not sure of the AFB surveillance in your state and your immunization rate are not good. The million-dollar question which troubles the pediatricians is how long are we going to continue with this pulse polio program? Pulse immunization to be repeated every year for 3 to 4 years. That was at the start in 1996. They considered by 2000 you can stop it. But now the present idea is, and even at that time they said that may continue at least annually at least 3 years, and until polio is reduced to focal transmission, at which time mopping up immunization begins. This again as per 1997 WHO publications. Now, definitely in India now the local transmission is almost gone, and definitely we should be doing only mopping up immunization. But right now the WHO has turned. For WHO and its partners at present, there is no doubt that the campaign had to continue till the virus was eradicated. Now, this seems to be the view now. Till the virus is eradicated, you have to continue this campaign. This is troublemaking because a country is declared as having eradicated polio. In 3 successive years, no wild polio virus cases are reported, and WHO is convinced about their surveillance. Even in 2022, there have been cases reported in Afghanistan. Therefore, you know that the end seems not eradication is not in the horizon immediately. Global eradication is achieved only when 3 years elapses since the last case of wild poliovirus, circulating vaccine-derived poliovirus, and vaccinating-derived poliomyelitis are eliminated. Now, this seems there's no light at the end of the tunnel right now. Therefore, the question, how long will you give the polio vaccination? There's no definite answer, and this is what is troubling many pediatricians. Therefore, summarizing our thoughts, Pulse Polio on National Immunization Day, conceived in 1980s and implemented in 1990s in India, implemented in South America in 1980 itself. In 1990 in India, a sound scientific basis and did contribute significantly to eradicate polio in many countries, including India. There's no doubt about that. The word polio eradication looks a bridge too far now, with cases of wild polio continuing to be reported. Cases of circulating vaccine-derived poliomyelitis virus are rising, and WHO has no definite strategy in sight for its eradication, and this strategy of switch from trivalent to bivalent polio has obviously failed. Polio eradication and endgame strategic plan of Global Polio Eradication Initiative Plan was endorsed in November 2012 by the Strategic Advisory Group of Experts on Immunization of the World Health Organization, published by WHO in April 2013. As a key component of this plan, it was necessary to stop oral polio vaccine use globally to achieve eradication, because the attenuation virus in the vaccine rarely can cause polio. Because the vaccine itself is responsible for the circulating vaccine-derived poliomyelitis. It was supposed to have worked in 2019, and now WHO does not even talk about when it will stop this pulse polio program. If you have to stop oral polio, definitely you have to stop oral polio vaccination. You have to definitely stop pulse oral polio also. Challenges expected for adding IPV into routine immunization schedule, including higher cost of IPV compared with OPV, cold chain capacity limits, more complex administration of vaccine because IPV requires injection as opposed to oral administration, and inferior intestinal immunity conferred by IPV. Now, with the intent which they had shown during COVID epidemic, I cannot understand why the WHO and the country cannot instill enthusiasm in all the countries to replace OPV with IPV, which seems to be the only solution of controlling circulating vaccine-derived poliomyelitis, type 2 especially. So what are the options available? From my discussions, I am nobody to suggest one, but from my own thoughts on my discussion so far, I think the option number one is what the WHO seems to follow: continue with the pulse polio till the world is eradicated of polio. The problem with that is, for this, the whole world should not have a single case of vaccine-derived poliomyelitis, wild poliovirus and circulating vaccine-derived poliovirus and vaccine-derived poliomyelitis for 3 years. And that doesn't seem to be in the horizon in the near future. And there is a fundamental question here: is it ethical to pump the children with these oral polio year after year, when especially in the private we find most of these children have already received 3 doses of IPV and also a booster dose? There are no reported cases of paralytic polio in patients who have received 4 doses of IPV. How can you insist on these children, taking this oral polio vaccine? That's an ethical question which is definitely will have to be answered. The plan B, which would be more scientific, would be strengthened routine immunization. You can't get away. You can't take shortcuts in public health. You have to strengthen the routine immunization right up to 80 to 95%. If you show the intent to do what you did for COVID vaccination, this can definitely be achieved. And this is what most of the pediatricians are telling. There has to be good AFP surveillance, acute flaccid paralysis surveillance. You have to introduce IPV and pay the cost for it. Seek alternate strategies. A single dose IPV seems not to be working. You have to completely replace OPV by IPV and stop pulse polio. This is the most scientific, more difficult route to take, but I don't think there's a shortcut for this. However, this requires discussion. If cases reported, do mopping up immunization in local areas. Alternate strategies required open discussion and somebody taking charge. And surprisingly, not only nobody is taking charge regarding this, there's no open discussion. That is what is surprising. Or the silence of the IAP as well as other organizations seems to be deafening. Now, who should take the lead? Remember, in 1989, the Immunization Advisory Committee of IAP recommended pulse polio use in the country in 1989. They did it rightly, and they did a very good recommendation. Now they have the moral responsibility to take the lead, to take the matter in hand and find a solution to the present impasse. Now, I should not run away from my learned teachers and professors' questions. The first question was, Madam, educate me the relevance of pulse polio program in the present era. I'm not sure that the local president answered these questions, maybe in private conversation. I have already answered this and discussed this already. Now, is it only in India? To the best of my knowledge, no. I don't think it's in developed countries like in Europe and America. They depend on their IPV for eradicate, to continue to protect their population. Developing countries, Africa, Asia, to my best of my knowledge, do have pulse polio program. India, of course, has. Now, can we have a Zoom meeting within 3 days? It was too much to expect from the professor. To brush aside controversial issues under the carpet rather than discussing them, let alone addressing them head on, seems to be the order of the day. Therefore, I'm not sure whether any Zoom meeting was held. I didn't see any, and I don't expect anything in the near future. As I end this presentation, may I place on record my thanks to Dr. Prathapan, the Nodal Officer of WHO in Kerala. He shared with me some valuable data, but the opinions which I have ventilated in this talk are my own. You can find my other blogs in pediatric topics and other YouTube presentation in this YouTube web page. Thank you for being with me for so long.